have we got a great show for you, and it's all about the design principle structure, and if I must say so myself, beautiful structure, all coming up next. During my years as a garden designer, I've enjoyed helping homeowners create private sanctuaries full of beauty and wonder. I find each garden to be a fresh opportunity to explore and create uniquely personal spaces. These are just a few of the gardens I've helped transform into garden homes. Hi, I'm Alan Smith. Welcome to The Garden Home, a show about design and blurring the lines between inside and out. We're all about trying to make the most of those outdoor living spaces. Now, in today's show, we're going to focus on one of the most important garden principles of all. That's structure, and the many ways it can play a role in a garden. Now, we're going to do something a little different in today's show. We're going to start in my downtown garden in the historic district. Many of you have seen it before, but it's matured quite a bit as we've been building the Garden Home Retreat. A little later in the show, we'll go out to the Garden Home Retreat and check on the construction progress. But in today's show, we're going to visit some interesting places. We're going to go to a racetrack that needs no introduction. We're going to head down south to Alabama, where a friend of mine is going to show you how to create a great raised bed. We'll also visit a butterfly house and learn some various plants that will attract and feed these colorful little acrobats of the sky and lure them into your garden. Now, before we go any further, I have to tell you something about this garden. We have this towering oak tree above us that casts a lot of shade in summer, but I just want to point out some of the structural components of this garden that really gives it a sense of intimacy. If you look at the wall beyond, that's actually a sasanqua hedge that blooms in the fall. It's a type of camellia, and I just planted a row of those and cut an arch in them so you create a sense of entry out of this garden into the next. Now, behind me is probably the gem of this entire garden. This is a rhododendron that has been here for almost 15 years. A good friend of mine who was a rhododendron hybridizer gave me this plant. And as you can see, it's in stunning, gorgeous bloom today. Now, one other thing to mention here is the path. It really plays an important role in the structure of this garden. It has a beautiful sort of serpentine line that carries you along the path. It's a hard surface to walk on, as well as a place to place a bench and lots of container plants. Okay, now I want to show you some more examples of structure just around the corner. Come on. Here we have columnar arbovita serving as a backdrop or the frame. The other plant that you can see directly behind me is this wonderful viburnum. It's in full bloom today, and you can see that it's supporting a very old rose. It dates to the end of the 18th century, and it's one of the first roses to bloom in this garden. Now, some other plants that I have here that help support the garden include this bank of knockout roses, which will bloom all summer long in front of the arbovita. And if you look around this garden room, you'll see boxwoods punctuating the entrances to the various gardens, as well as at the opposite end, you can see a bank of boxwoods that I've clipped into a large boxwood sofa, if you will. And I have to tell you, one of the great ways to see whether the framework of a garden really works is to look at it in the winter, when all the leaves are off the trees. And if you can take a look at it when a snow falls, then you can really see if you have an interesting composition. In my fountain garden, it's a beautiful garden, even in winter, because of the shapes and forms that I've created with boxwoods and hollies and so forth. In the winter, when the snow falls, these forms become very apparent. Now, if you take a look through the main axis of the garden, through the arbors, through the fountain garden, and beyond the rondelle, you see the tool shed, another structure that serves as a bit of garden ornament in this particular place. As you well know, I have a variety of animals at the Garden Home Retreat, and it seems like they just keep multiplying. It feels a lot like Noah's Ark. You know, the principle of structure plays a big part in housing all of these creatures. Besides the mobile chicken coop, which we'll talk about later, The construction was recently completed on my Bantam chicken temple. I also have these adorable khaki Campbell ducks, great egg layers, who are housed within my new 1-acre vegetable garden. They love going after all those bugs. And the old dairy barn serves as a great place for newborn lambs and their mothers, so they get adjusted before turning them out with a larger flock. Now, on a recent trip to New Jersey, I came across a different kind of garden structure, a butterfly house. Butterflies can really bring a flower garden to life, as you might know, as they flutter around from bloom to bloom. Jeff Hoagland, who's the education director at Stony Brook Millstone Watershed Association, tells us that luring butterflies to a garden is really quite simple.
This is really essentially a living museum for butterflies and native plants, a place for families and children and adults to come and enjoy the world of nature up close. Everybody loves butterflies. It's really relatively easy to attract them. The first place to start is with nectar sources, flowers. We find a variety of nectar sources. We've got a lot of rudbeckia or black-eyed Susans. There's some cardinal flower in bloom. There's also Joe Pyeweed about to bloom. And of course, one of our favorites is milkweed. Blazing star is in bloom as well. And we have a couple of shrubs that are blooming as well. One is called buttonbush. We also have sweet pepper bush. We also have plants in here that were chosen to provide food for the larvae of some of the common native butterflies. Certainly one of the easiest to try out at home is planting milkweed for the monarch butterfly. If you're growing milkweed, you'll not only see a variety of butterflies sipping on nectar, you may see monarchs visiting and laying eggs. You'll have to look carefully, typically on the underside of the leaves for eggs, and look for chewed leaves, which will often indicate the presence of monarch larvae, the banded caterpillars. But we have other guests as well. We have tortoise beetles visiting plants. This garden is an education tool. It's an opportunity for kids to get involved. They're discovering new plants, they're discovering new flowers, they're discovering new bugs, other residents of the spaces that surround us.
If you know me, you know I love the idea of raised beds, and really it's a form of structure. Just look at the pattern I've created in this tiny space here in my vegetable garden. You can see I have 4 square beds, and then on the corner I have 4 triangular shaped beds. Now what's great about this is that I can rotate crops through the season, and I can put the soil I want in these beds. So no matter how bad the soil was here to begin with, I can amend this just exactly the way I want it to grow beautiful vegetables and flowers. This time of year, while it's still cool, I love to grow those cool season vegetables. As you can see, we have red lettuce, broccoli, collards, cabbage, all kinds of herbs in the way of garlic and parsley, and over here, some of that delicious butter crunch lettuce. And in the center of this bed, I've placed a large terracotta pot, and I'm growing these beautiful sweet peas with just some bamboo and twine as a trellis, another form of structure. Now, if you take a closer look at these beds, they're made of 2x8 lumber. This is western cedar, so it doesn't rot. And I put them together with wood screws. Now, there are lots of ways to create these beds. I've taken the approach to do multiple small beds, but a friend of mine, Sydney Phelps, has a different approach with a much larger bed.
I built my 8x24 garden, 5 landscape timbers high on the front side, and then I did 6 on the back side because I wanted my garden to be perfectly level here. I built this to last. I use landscape timbers. I've used rebar to have a solid support. And on the top of it, I put an untreated 2x4. I got compost, manure, different types of soil, blending them all together to have a nice mix in here. I've got a really good commercial grade ground cover underneath here to help weeds from coming up in underneath. I also have it on top of my soil. My irrigation, underneath my ground cover, I've laid soaker hoses, so it's easy for me to maintain. I can just grab my water hose, hook it here. It makes it really easy, and everything's contained in one. You know, I've got all my stuff spaced out properly, 18 to 24 inches apart. By the time this early spring crop is over with, I'm gonna harvest out anywhere between 250 and 300 pounds of fresh produce. That's not having to go to the grocery store. That's right here in this raised bed. I'll be able to plant and harvest this 2 or 3 more times this year.
Okay, so we're back out here at the Garden Home Retreat now, and you can see I really take this idea of structure to heart. What you see going on behind me are 2 tool sheds. Actually, one of them is going to be a place for water purification. We're drilling a well, and we're going to have a place to actually purify the water slightly, take some of the iron out of it. And the other is going to be a tool shed for this large vegetable garden. I'm so excited about the size of this garden. We're growing things that I haven't had a chance to grow in a long time, mainly potatoes and lots of asparagus and things like that that require a lot of room. We call this the acre garden, and an acre is basically 209 feet times 209 feet, and that's what we're going to fence all the way around. So the fence will come off of these two structures and wrap around the entire rectangle of this space. And let's focus on the buildings for just a minute. When we cleared this area, we made sure that any of the pine trees that were large enough to be taken to the sawmill, we saved, and that's exactly what we did. So we're recycling those trees. We got it back from the sawmill, and that's what we're using in part for these buildings. Some of it is cypress, locally harvested and used here. Now the windows that are going in these buildings are salvaged from houses that have been pulled down. So I'm very excited about reusing and recycling right here. Now take a look at the pathway. As I've mentioned, pathways are very important, and I consider them part of the structure of a garden. Here, we got very serious about drainage, because in a vegetable garden, you need excellent drainage. So down the center of this garden, we put in a filter fabric base and then covered that with B-size ballast with these big, large rocks. And now we're coming back and covering it with a nice brown creek gravel. Now it's round, and as you walk on it, it slips and slides. And once this gets packed down, we're going to come in with some fines from the same creek and cover that so that it'll interlock and make it easy to walk on. So things are coming along. I'm pretty excited about it. Throughout the Garden Home Retreat, you see examples of structure everywhere you turn. It's just such an important principle of design. Take this arbor, for instance. It's 40 feet long, and there's a twin arbor at the opposite end of the garden. This place is about trialing plants. I had, for 3 years, some grape varieties there that absolutely did nothing. They were a disaster. And I never really talked about them because I really wanted to see how they would perform, and they just didn't do well. And I recommend that if you have a desire to plant a certain sort of fruit crop, that you check with your local county extension agent for varieties that work well in your area. Here we've planted 2 great table grapes. And I've also planted along here a long row of iris, which work so beautifully when this Renaissance spirea flowers. Now, this is an old-fashioned bridal wreath spirea, but with a whole new twist on it. It blooms later than the old-fashioned bridal wreath spirea, and the leaves are so much prettier throughout the entire season. It's a really great plant. Now, another thing you might consider in the way of structure in the garden would be a tuteur. And I design these, and I bring them out each year to plant annual vines on. Take, for instance, any of the morning glories. They look gorgeous on a tuteur like this. Or mandevilla, one of the tropical vines with those gorgeous pink flowers. Those are just a couple of examples, and there are many others that you can use to grow or garden on the vertical. And when you do, you'll see a whole new dimension of your garden open up. When it comes to structure, no matter where I'm gardening, whether it's for a client or here at the Garden Home Retreat or at my home downtown, I really like buildings that serve both beauty and function. And that's the way I consider this little hobbyist greenhouse. It's really very handy to have around because I use it to store a lot of my tropical plants through the winter. And it's still just a little too cool to bring out the olive trees, the citrus, and some of the agaves and so forth that I keep in there throughout the winter. The other thing that's so nice about it is that I have it surrounded by a needlepoint holly hedge. Kind of keeps the wind off of it, and it is contained within its own little courtyard, if you will. We've covered this with pea gravel so we can set containers of plants. You can see I'm well on my way with some potted vegetables in the way of broccoli and red cabbage, and even we've dared to put out a few tomatoes, even though it may get cold, but we can just put them right back in the greenhouse if temperatures are too threatening. This is a wonderful place for me to go in the winter and start seedlings. But for some of my friends who are in the horticulture business, well, their greenhouse they depend on. John Backert is the chief horticulturist at Churchill Downs, and believe me, he puts his greenhouse to work.
All right, come on in, take a look.
So this is where it all starts.
This is the place.
My goodness, look at all of these plants and what variety. Now you rotate a lot of crops in and out of here because of all the seasonal changes you do.
Yeah, we do about 30,000 annuals for the spring and then turn around and do 15,000 things for the fall. And in between, we've got our tropicals and things that we overwinter. You know, we follow that. I end up mixing a lot of tropicals in with my containers, especially in that areas, you know, areas like the paddock that are hot and heat up quick. You know, I use a lot of things like canna in there, and I'll use hibiscus and heliconia, things like that.
I noticed when we walked in that you had those beautiful euphorbia catanifolias. Oh, those are fabulous.
Yeah, those are really good. That's one that I wasn't really familiar with until this year. First year I've grown it, and you know, one thing I like about tropicals, Alan, is they're just so fast. I fished out a tree form of that in 7 months.
Well, I think that's one of the things that makes it such a fun place to visit and a fun place to work.
It is a fun place to work.
I don't know about you, but I enjoyed making terrariums, or perhaps it's more accurate to say terraria, the plural of the word, as a kid, and I still do today. It's one of the best ways to introduce children to gardening, and it gives them an understanding of nature's life cycles and systems. You see, these terrariums can be stylish additions to any room, either as a large single element or as clusters of several varied shapes. Look for plants that are small-leafed and slow-growing. Also, if the jar has a lid, choose plants that can take high humidity. Fuzzy leaf plants are probably best avoided because they're known to rot inside the terrarium. Believe me, terrariums are easy to put together. Just add a couple of inches of gravel to the bottom of a jar, then a layer of some aquarium charcoal. You see, this absorbs odors, and add sterilized potting soil, and then just plant them up. Mist the sides of the jar and remove any unwanted soil and water so the soil is moist, but not soggy. When covered and placed in bright, indirect light, you won't need to water the contents of the terrarium again for several months. Talk about a low-maintenance houseplant arrangement. I like to make terrariums and arrange them in groups of 3 or more. Choosing containers with contemporary shapes and varying heights add interest to the display. You know, it's a lot of fun keeping chickens out here at the Garden Home Retreat, and I really consider them a part of our green initiative here. What's great about them is that they are pastured, so the eggs are, well, they're fortified by all this green grass and all the bugs and things that they collect here in the orchard. And the orchard itself is fortified by the fact that that mobile chicken house has a wire floor in it, so all the chicken droppings drop to the ground and fertilize this orchard. And if you can tell just through the camera lens, some of these areas are much darker and greener than others, and that's where this fence has been and where the chicken house has rested for a period of time. You see, it's beginning to warm up. We're still having very cool nights, but as this grass begins to grow, we'll have to move the house less and less. In the winter, I have to move it about every week. In high summer, we move it about every 3 weeks. So it works out very well. It also fertilizes the wildflowers that we have down here just by the gentle rains washing the nutrient down the hill. And I love this electric fence. It's only 30 inches tall, and this little solar component creates enough current that for predators to come up here, they touch their nose on it and it will get you. So it's really quite a self-sufficient operation, a very green component to the Garden Home Retreat. This is the place in the show I really enjoy. We take photographs that you send of your houses and gardens. We take a look at them, play around with some ideas, and see what we can do in terms of improving the landscape. Today, we have a house in Tennessee. It belongs to Nana. Now what Nana would like to do is create a cottage style here, and I think she's got the perfect house. But first, Nana, we're going to have to clean up a few things. First of all, this Nellie R. Stevens is way too big, and if you keep it, you need to bring it way down. It's way too big for this corner. And you can just see beyond the trees here, there's another one on this corner here. You've got to really bring those down. I think they're overpowering the house. These barberries for this walk across here, they're sticky. I would remove those. This looks like a nandina that needs to go. And these two trees, or three trees here, I'm seeing some line trimmer blight, as we call it, where they've been damaged. And I almost think you need to take those away. So if we could get something on the corner, get these Nellie R. Stevens cut down. Honestly, they're so big and they get so big, I would replace these with a much smaller holly, even a needlepoint holly, or better yet, maybe just a columnar yew, English yew. They don't grow too tall. All right, so that's going to get everything into scale. This goes away, like I said, all of this. Now let's talk about what we can do in terms of hardscape to give you that cottage feel that you want. I really think you ought to pick up on the idea that you could create a broader walk over to the front step, okay, like this, to the front. Then start here with a picket fence and run that picket fence all the way down to the corner, all right? So we'd have a picket fence, you'd have a gate over here and a picket fence that would run back here. Your new walk is here. So you're going to pick up that white picket all the way down. And if you wanted to, you could even open it up here if you wanted to come out that way. This would be gone. I would come in with a Yoshino cherry or some flowering tree. You've got a dogwood back here. It could be another dogwood. It could be a weeping cherry, which would be beautiful here. Then on this fence, there are all sorts of roses that you could grow. You have western exposure, so you can plant clematis, you can plant roses on the fence. I love the little scarlet honeysuckle. The hummingbirds adore it. It will certainly grow well in your part of the world. Up here near the house, I would put a boxwood here, be very traditional with that, and keep everything low. This could be dwarf boxwood all along the front here in front of this new plant, which is going to be much reduced in size. Then in this bed behind it, you can have a field day with all sorts of perennials. You mentioned you like those, so I would look at some spring perennials such as peonies. Have a great time with lots of peonies, daylilies, Asiatic lilies, oriental lilies. All of these great perennials that take full sun would be perfect here. You could have an exquisite cottage garden. So Nana, good luck with this project. It looks very exciting. Well, as we've seen, structure plays an important role in small landscapes as well as large ones. You can see here how the two barns actually frame the house. Three structures there with the house in the center. And we have to look at the fencing as well. It's a part of the structured landscape. Without the fencing, well, Zeus and Apollo would be going anywhere they want. Well, that's all the time we have in today's show. I hope it's been helpful to you as you design your own garden home. Until next time, from the Garden Home, I'm Alan Smith. More information about today's topic and other topics covered in this series can be found at plansmith.com.